Hey, welcome back to another video. This video is going to be a basic introduction into Laravel commands and a little bit of the artisan console. I find commands really useful, and I noticed that they're not really talked about that much. I've used them a lot in work to write backfills and post-migration stuff that didn't really belong within migration files, and they've always served me well, so I figured I'd show a little bit about what they can do. Before I get started though, I want to mention that I just crossed 700 subscribers, so thank you all so much. It is really surprising to me that after 5 months I reached 700. I didn't expect this. And obviously that's not the only metric I look at. I really appreciate that some of you find these videos useful and find them valuable, and I'm going to keep making them. With that being said, I actually just picked up a new mic, so please do let me know in the comments below what it sounds like. I hope the quality is a little bit better. So yeah, let's get started. I created this basic application, and actually I didn't even create it. I mean, it's just a fresh Laravel application. And basically what I'm going to do, and just as a demo, I'm going to write a command that basically fills a column on the users table with a value that already exists on each user record. That's going to make more sense once I go through it. But the first thing I want to do is just make sure that I have everything set up that I need to set up before writing the command. So I'm going to go into the create users table migration and just create another column. And it's going to be table string email domain. I'm going to make this nullable. And basically I want to take whatever email we seed and just take the domain off of it with the command and store it as a domain. I'm not sure. I mean, it's not a great example, I understand, but it's going to be perfect for demonstrating what you can do with commands and like the different progress bars you can build and stuff like that. So just bear with me. It'll make more sense as we go along. I need to also make sure to add that as a fillable inside the user model. I always forget to do this. So domain, email domain. And we also need to go into the database seeder, which we'll seed using the existing app models user model factory. And it's going to seed 3000. I had this uncommented before. It actually just right out of the box, it actually comes like this. So it just seeds 10 by default. And we could actually leave it like that and increases later. I'm going to run the migrations and seed at the same time. That's PHP artisan migrate and seed. So we can go into our SQL Pro here and take a look. And we see we have 10 users and the email domain column is null. Perfect. So to get started, what we want to do is just create a new command. But before I do that, I want to mention that in the console.php file, we can actually define commands here, just as like closure based, I guess. And Laravel actually comes with an inspire command. So that looks like this, PHP artisan inspire. It just shows a random quote. And that's what this comment thing is. So this comment outputs that quote, and the purpose actually defines the description of the command. And this is the signature. So that's what I typed here, inspire. Now we could look at all the commands we have available by typing PHP artisan list. And in here, we could actually find, if we scroll up, that we actually have the inspire command right here. So inspire and display an inspiring quotes. That's the purpose right here. Now, I've never actually defined a command within the console.php file because typically commands get quite big. So there's no point in just defining it here unless it's really simple. And that might be the case, but I've always just created a new class for them. And that's done with the PHP artisan make command. And we can call this one update user email domain command. So once I hit enter there, it should create a new command, and it says it did. So let's close everything up and just take a fresh look, update user email domains command. So this is our command. And immediately when we open it, we're greeted by the signature, the description, a constructor, and the handle method. So one by one, the signature is what the actual command is that we'll type in. So right now it would be PHP artisan command : name. Now that doesn't make sense in our case, and we'll change it in a second, but it's worth mentioning that that's what it does, right? We have a description, which is what shows up when we type in PHP artisan list. That is super useful and underappreciated when you have a ton of commands and you want to just look through that list and actually read through what each one does. Down here, the constructor we're not going to touch, but we have the handle method, which is where we're going to do all our work. And so the first thing I want to do is actually just rename this to user update email domain. And I try to always follow the model, action, and column kind of convention. That's just a personal thing. I'm not sure if it makes sense for other people and other use cases, but that's what I do just to keep my commands neatly organized within the PHP artisan list output. And in here, I'm just going to write update email domain values for users, because we're going to make this actually update one user or all of them. So as we go down here, we're just going to test that this command actually works. And the way I'm going to do that is by echoing just hello world out. So let's copy this signature and see if we can get some output. And we do, hello world. So our command does work. The first thing I want to do actually is just make an argument. So one thing the main thing that I want to just point out here is that your signature can actually have arguments and options in it. And so let's define a user argument. So here, when I pass in an argument into this signature, when I'm calling this command, it'll actually pass this down to the handle method, and this will be available for us to use. In our case, that'll be the ID of the user we want to update, right? If we wanted to, for example, queue this process, we could just create an option here and call it queue. And you could set a default, and you could even make it shorthand. So you could do -- capital Q and then that, and that would also work. But in our case, we're not going to use any options. We're just going to use an argument here, and that's going to be for the user ID. We could make it optional. We could make it an array, and we could even set a default. But in our case, we're just going to leave it like this for now because we're going to require an ID for the first part of this command. So first things first, let's just echo out the argument and see if we get it. This argument user. Let's see if we could try this command again. So not enough arguments, missing user, which makes total sense. Let's pass in 1 and we get 1. So our argument does come through and it does work. So the first thing we want to do is get the user using that ID we're passing into the command. So we find the user and then we get the email domain from the email that's saved on the user and then update it. So the first thing I'm going to do is just get the user, right? User is equal to user, and we want to make sure that that's imported. Find or fail. This argument user. And then we want to get the domain. So in this case, I just want to get the user email. And I was going to use regex originally, but that feels like a really heavy solution. The best way is probably just to explode this on the @ symbol. And then just grab the second part of that array. So index of 1. And if we dd this out and run this command, we should get example.com because our user with ID 1 has an example.com email, which makes perfect sense. So continuing on, we can now remove this dd and we could do user update email domain to the domain. And we can also do this info, which will make a green text output and say user with ID, user ID has been updated. Let's see what that looks like. So user with ID 1 has been updated. Let's check if that's true, and it is. So example.com is right there, and it looks like it works perfectly. So that's basically how you use this info and also the arguments to pass stuff down to your command logic. And some interesting things to point out is that we could actually put a line. So let's see if that works. And you can see that the text is no longer green. Another really useful one is actually error. And that's nice and red, so it's very obvious that something went wrong. And so we can leave this as info because that'll be the end of this part of the command if we're only updating 1. We can actually now make this user here, this argument, optional, because if we don't pass in a user ID, my goal is to update every single user in the database. And we're going to actually go over how to do this with chunking, with a cursor, or just getting all the records and keeping them in memory, but that's going to be the goal. And the first thing I want to do is just wrap this within an if statement to check if we're only supposed to update 1 user. So let's go ahead and do that. What I'm actually going to opt to do is move the user up here, and we're going to set this in the if statement and actually assign it in here so we can reuse it more easily. And just use user ID in here. And we're going to move this info up here along with the update. And in here, I'm going to just use the user ID that we get from the argument. And in here, I'm going to actually opt to make a private method because we're going to be reusing this explode kind of logic over and over again for the loop when we're updating all users, if that's what the user selects or if that's what the user sets the command to do. And so what I'm going to do is just call this get email domain. And I'm going to pass in the user email. And of course, we need to actually create this method, and I'm going to make it private. So function, make it private, and let's call it get email domain. And we're going to have a string email parameter. And what we want to do is just copy this logic here and return it. So return this and only pass in the email to the explode. Need a semicolon, and now that should work. So let's try it and see if that actually works now still. And let's try it on an ID that doesn't have an update yet. So let's try ID2, and it should output example.net. Okay, ID2 has been updated. Let's see, and it works. Perfect. So we can actually move on to getting the bulk update started. And the first thing I want to do is just make this, well, we already made it optional here for the user. And so what I want to do is make sure that the user actually wants to update all records. That seems like a really big change. And you definitely always want to add like a fail safe, just in case someone uses the command and forgets to input an ID, they have an option to cancel if they don't realize what they're doing. And so the easiest way to do this is to just check if not this, confirm, update all users, return with this error, all updates canceled. So this will actually output a confirmation text on the console, and you'll be able to confirm with yes, Y, N, or no. And the default will be no unless we pass in true here. But we don't want that. We want it to default to no. And so we can actually see this in action by not passing an ID in. And so if I click out now, if I click enter, it'll just be no and all updates canceled. And I feel like just outputting all updates canceled makes it very, very obvious, despite it not being an error, makes it really obvious that we didn't run anything, and that's probably the best way to do it. It's also worth mentioning that we can actually do ask, which will prompt us for just a text answer, and it'll actually give us that text answer. And that's what would be available within your command. Or we could do secret, which will make I'm typing right now, but no, nothing's coming up on the prompt. So that's for like password stuff. But we want confirm. That works best here. And we could see yes, we'll continue on, no error will be outputted. So now down here, what I want to do is just, first I'm going to show you the easiest way to get a progress bar going. And then I'll show you the way that you'd have to use if you're chunking, because there's no way to really use the chunk with the easy way of building the progress bar. So the included easy way is this with progress bar, and then you pass in user all, and then you pass in a function that basically will be called on each user, and that passes in a user. And within here, we're going to do our update. So we're going to copy this line and we're going to put it in here, and it's going to update every single user, their email domain column with the get email domain value of user email, which the user is being passed in here. So this should actually work. I'm just going to add a line here. This info updates completed successfully. And I'm actually going to add this new line just to space it out from the progress bar, because it'll actually be on the same line. One thing to also note here is if you pass in an integer here, that's how many lines of space it'll give you. I'm okay with just one. And I'm also going to return this info here just so we know that the command just returns out. That's just for peace of mind for me. So let's see what it looks like. Do you want to update all users? Before I hit yes, I just want to show you that only 2 users have an email domain set. And so if I hit yes, we can see that the progress bar appears, updates completed successfully. And if we refresh here, all users have their correct email domain set, which is great. Now, just looking at this output here, maybe we could use a little space above this. So I'm going to set this to 2 lines. And the other problem is we don't actually see the progress bar working because it's only 10 records and is relatively fast. So what I'm going to do is just seed more users. So let's go to our database seeder and let's seed 3,000 just so we can see it actually doing work. And what I'm going to do is migrate fresh seed. So PHP artisan migrate fresh seed. And that should now give us 3,000 records. Let's check. It does. We have 3,000 records in this table. Let's run this command now and see what happens. Okay, went through, did everything. Let's check if the column is filled, and it sure is. And it looks like they're all correct. .net, .org, .com are in the correct spots. And so that works, but the problem we'll encounter as we get more and more records updating in bulk, and especially if we're doing more within this loop here, within here, we might very well run out of memory. And it's pretty dangerous. What we can use is cursor. And I'm not going to go into depth on how cursor works because quite frankly, I'd probably confuse myself as I'm explaining it. But underneath, it's actually using PHP generators. And it's worth reading into. It's very cool. And this will actually reduce the memory load because it'll get one object at a time, even though it's only querying once, which is very interesting. It's a big concept. So I'll leave some links below if you're interested in reading. I definitely would recommend checking it out. But if we rerun this, we can actually migrate fresh seed. MFS is just an alias I have, just to reset the table. Let's check that that's the case. And now let us run the command again. Yes. Okay, so it doesn't seem faster. You won't see any difference. It still runs the same, but this would probably prevent any memory issues or be better, more efficient on memory than just getting all the records of the users and storing them and looping over them. So that was the easy way. Now, what if you wanted to chunk? I commonly used chunk before when I was writing commands because it'll query however many you set at a time. And it makes it really easy to control and set how much memory you want to be using as this command works. And basically what you have to do is you have to define the progress bar first, start it, then you have to increment it, and then you have to finish it instead of just using this with progress bar. And I'll show you how to do that. So first things first, we're going to define it. I'm going to call it bar, just like they do in the Laravel documentation. This output, create progress bar. And then within here, we're going to just put the user count. We're going to count the user so the progress bar knows what the maximum amount is. And you have to unfortunately do a separate query just for the count and then do the chunking underneath. And then we can do bar start just to tell it that it should be starting. And then within here, we could actually do the chunk. So first I'm going to do the chunk without the bar, and then we can integrate the advance within it. So this would be user chunk, and let's just say we want to chunk by 50 records. And then we pass in a function here that gets the users. Now, mind you, this is a collection of users, not individual users. And we want to just get users each and get another function passed in. This time it's single user. And then within here, we could do the user update, and this will actually work. And I'll demonstrate that this works now. Whoops, users. At the bottom here, we could just do bar finish. Although I don't know if it'll run without the advance now that we're actually using the bar, but we could try. So yes. Okay, so it looks like the bar just went from 0 to 3,000 because we didn't actually advance it, but it went from start to finish, so that's why. But we probably got the records updated. Let's see. Okay, let me migrate fresh seed and try again. Let's check that the column is empty, and it is. Okay, so it looks like it's said it's finished. Let's see if that's true, and it is. So it's updated everything, so the chunking does work. And now if we want to just make the progress bar actually work, all we have to do when this is finished, which means all 50 users have been updated, we just do bar advance and pass in how many records to basically advance by, which in this case is 50. And of course, we need to pass in bar. So if we now go and actually run this and see what happens, I'm sure it'll work. Let's migrate fresh and seed again. Check that that column is empty, and it is. And we got 3,000 records. If I rerun this command again, yes, it should set all of them. And you can see that the progress bar actually works, and it does set all of them. And now if I migrate fresh seed again, and we only update the first one, it looks like it's been updated, so we just found a problem. So we need to actually return out if we set an ID and it's updated, which we're not doing. So in here, we need to put a return in here so there's no, the command stops running right here instead of continuing on. So now let's rerun migrate fresh and seed and rerun the command again for just one user. User with ID 1 has been updated. Let's find user with ID 1 right at the top, and it looks like that's the only one that has the email domain updated. So that's how you use commands. I mean, it's pretty cool. I've always enjoyed using them. Like I said, it's really easy to split them up and then have them available to run whenever you want, how many times you want. And so if you found this video helpful and you like the channel, please do consider subscribing. It's the best way to help out. Once again, thank you so much for 700, and please do let me know below how this mic sounds. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video.